RC is a skill that you build on top of these things. Is in active voice and we don't need passive voice here. So we need to change this. So will it. Now object is also a noun. So that's another opportunity for you to add some more adjectives here. And then narration is what is also known as direct and indirect speech. So noun, antecedent agreement or subject verb agreement. We'll go one of these two ways depending upon. Welcome to MBA Wallah English. I am Vikrant, your personal coach for all things related to English, parts of reasoning, communication skills, and subsequently for all those VAT and PI processes. Alongside that, if you have some mental aspects that you want to talk about, a champion would also typically have a lot of psychological aspects that he focuses on, then I'm once again your man, your coach for all those things. So welcome to this particular session where we go ahead and talk about must-do topics in grammar and vocabulary. So that's going to be our focus area. But before I actually pick it up, you may have this question. In fact, a lot of people at times ask me this question, and I see these students who come to me and they look at me and then they ask, Vikrant, why should I really do this? Why should I go ahead and focus on grammar and vocabulary? After all, I am preparing for the CAT exam, and this exam has not asked us questions based on grammar and vocabulary for more than a decade now. भाई 10 साल से ऊपर हो गए, आया नहीं. इनफैक्ट ऑलमोस्ट 20 साल ही समझ लो. तो 20-20 साल हो गए यार, अब मुझे क्या तैयारी करने की जरूरत है भी इनकी? तो my answer is a very unambiguous yes. Why is my answer very unambiguous yes? When you look at the VA-RC section of the CAT exam, तो ये जो VA and RC है, when you talk about VA and RC, these are only the tip of the iceberg. You see these two things getting asked in your CAT exam, but the truth is the entire English section is actually a pyramid, and VA and RC, excellent performance in these two areas depends on these other three areas that lie beneath. So the verbal reasoning is practically the foundation of the entire program, and that is why when you spend time with me, when you work with me, you notice that we pay a lot of attention on critical reasoning, on sharpening our ability to think. And I also very, very strongly recommend that you do work on grammar and vocabulary. Both of these are knowledge-based areas, and frankly, I personally find knowledge-based areas easy. Yet I encourage people to go ahead and do these every day. Why every day? Because both of these are very vast, and unless you take out some amount of time every day for these, chances are that you may continue to struggle. So you do require these things as well. So in fact, RC is a skill that you build on top of these things. And then whatever you learn in all of these 4 modules, you add to it a particular approach, a particular technique, and you can start getting the VA questions right. But if you are weak here, you cannot really expect an above average score in the VA-RC section of the CAT exam. And therefore, to answer that question directly, why should you, of all the people, work on grammar and vocabulary? Well, it is something that will help you, or these are areas that will help you perform better in the CAT exam. So come to think of it, there are times when people approach me. I'm sure some of your friends may ask you that, hey, I am not able to understand this passage. So why is it that people are not able to understand a passage? Well, part of the reason is that they may not understand the words that are used in that passage. And then there are times when you come across some very long, lengthy, convoluted sentences as part of your passage. Now, in fact, I remember one of these PYQs where the first paragraph, yes, an entire paragraph of a passage had, how many sentences? One. Just one. One sentence was 6 lines long, so much so that it basically turned it into a paragraph. So whenever I come across such convoluted long sentences, I rely on my understanding of grammar. So I know that at the end of the day, every sentence has a subject and a predicate, right? So every sentence has a subject, something that the speaker focuses on, and a predicate, something that the speaker tells me about the subject, right? Now within this, I know that the core of the subject is always going to be a noun or a pronoun, and the core of the predicate is always going to be a verb. So how do we make a sentence longer? We can start adding more things to these nouns, right? You can add adjectives and that can help. You can add more things to the verb. So what do we add to the verbs? We can add adverbs. You can also go ahead and maybe add an object to the verb. Now object is also a noun, so that's another opportunity for you to add some more adjectives here. Plus, this entire structure technically is one clause, and your sentences can actually have more clauses. You can have a clause 2, you can have a clause 3, and that is how your sentence goes on to become bigger, goes on to become longer. But because I know grammar, I can break it down into every individual clause. Within every clause, I look at the subject, the predicate, take out the core noun or nouns and the core verb, understand it, and then piece everything together. Of course, I do that only when that sentence is needed to answer a question. Otherwise, I won't even do that. But I have that ability thanks to grammar. So it is something which is very important for RC. Plus, you attend these VA sessions with me on this channel where you've seen there are times when I solve parajumbles and I solve paragraph odd one out, and I so very often talk about grammar based clues. So if you're weak at grammar, how would you go ahead and identify those clues? And that is why this is an area which of course helps you in the CAT exam, but the benefits don't stop just here. So far, I'm assuming that you're writing only the CAT exam, and even here, when it comes to the subsequent selection stages, okay, once you are shortlisted, you will be put through what? A written ability test, you'll be put through a personal interview. Some of the colleges may even put you through a group discussion or a group exercise or an extempore. At each one of those stages, a superior vocabulary, a certain level of comfort with grammar make you more effective, make you more impactful. And thus, the benefits don't end only with the CAT. And not only that, once the college selects you, you will join that college, and in that college, you would notice that you are taken through a lot of presentations, book reports, summaries, vocab and grammar will help you there, and they'll also help you later on in your career. So these are areas which are important life skills to have. And then, of course, just in case CAT is not the only exam that you're writing, let's say you plan to write SNAP, NMAT, CMAT, Maharashtra, CET, any of those other ZAT for that matter, then you would notice that they are going to ask you a lot of direct questions that are based on grammar and vocabulary. So for instance, last year, SNAP had 10 grammar-based questions and 5 vocabulary based questions, and that's all that the paper had in English. 15 questions, just grammar and vocabulary. So if you are writing OMATs, it is imperative that you go ahead and work on these two areas. And why won't you be writing OMATs for that matter? I mean, I normally encourage people to write as many exams as they can with the preparation that they are doing for MBA. And when I say as many, I'm saying I actually take them even beyond the scope of MBA, and I say, can you write SSC? Can you write some other RBI exam? Whatever. If 80% of the syllabus overlaps, I am all for your going ahead and appearing for those exams. So hopefully by now you are convinced that Vikrant, it does make sense. I should work on grammar and vocabulary. So what exactly it is that you would want to focus on when it comes to grammar? So what all areas should you go ahead and focus more on? So the truth is, if I look at grammar holistically, it basically has two things. Those two things are parts of speech. So that's one area. And then you have all of these different, not exactly parts, but elements of sentence. So if you start combining, if you look at the sum total, we happen to have 8 different parts of speech going by conventional traditional grammar. In some of the newer varieties, instead of 8, we actually happen to have 9. But then let's just stick to the traditional ones. So you have 8 different parts of speech to focus on. And then you happen to have 6 different parts of sentence. So within parts of speech, you remember you have nouns, pronouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, prepositions, conjunctions, interjections, and then in elements of sentence, of course, let's start here. You need to know what a sentence is along with its types. Then you have subject, object, predicate, phrase, clause, along with their types wherever applicable. So all in all, you'd notice there are these 14 chapters, and then there are a couple of areas which combine multiple things out of these 14 together to form a separate specialized domain. For instance, we have subject-verb agreement, we have parallelism or parallel structure, parallel construction as we at times call it, right? So basically 16 odd concepts or chapters to go through, but out of these 16, I would ideally want you to go ahead and solve all of those. But in case you're somebody who's starting today and you are targeting OMATs this year, and you are preparing for the CAT and you're able to take out only limited amount of time, then yes, there are some areas and aspects that I do want you to focus more on. Which ones? Let's check. So the first thing that you want to do is acquire or build a solid foundation of grammar. So when I say a solid foundation, you need to know what part of speech is and what each one of those 8 parts of speech stands for. Along with that, you'd also want to develop the ability to identify the role played by a particular word in terms of part of speech within a sentence, and the exact same thing for elements of sentence. So I'm not saying that build depth there, but when I ask you what a phrase is, you should know. If I ask you that, okay, hey, tell me those 5 different types of phrases, you should know. Now, why should you know this? There are 2 reasons. It makes it easier for you to understand the rest of the grammar, and that's very convenient, very handy. And number 2, when you talk about exams like SNAP, exams like Maharashtra CET, particularly SNAP, they are notorious for asking foundation level questions in the exams. They can ask you about the part of speech of a word or an expression. They can ask you about the type of a sentence. They can ask you a very basic question on syntax. So if your foundation is weak, you may struggle. And this is not exactly a very challenging part. I think in terms of concepts, we are talking about what, around 1.5 hours, and thereafter it is more about practicing more and more questions. Then the next area that I would pick up is pronouns. So within pronouns, there are quite a few things that we can study. But we happen to have something called pronoun antecedent agreement. Make sure that you are at least comfortable with this. So what this means is that, we use pronoun. A pronoun goes ahead and replaces a noun. So antecedent is the noun that the pronoun has replaced. So the pronoun should agree with the noun that it replaces in terms of number, gender, case. So that's an aspect that you want to become good at, because this is one of those areas that does contribute quite a few questions to our exams. Then the next one is tenses. Tenses for multiple reasons. One reason is obviously that we do get questions that are based on tenses in the exam, particularly those exams that test your grammar through fill in the blank questions. They are the ones which are very fond of tenses. Plus tenses, because it is a very important area of grammar even otherwise. Even if you're not good at grammar, even if you make mistakes of grammar in your everyday life, it's okay. Most of the times people won't even know it. People will not even realize it. But there are some areas of grammar where the errors are conspicuous, noticeable, and they can make the other person listen to you and say, what is it? What is this person? What is it that this person is trying to say? They can get confused. So tenses, something that you definitely want to master. And then there are three more areas that build upon tenses. So you have voice and narration. So that's one. So voice is, remember, active and passive voice, something that you've hopefully studied in school and have a vague recollection of this. And then narration is what is also known as direct and indirect speech. So we do get questions based on these, and both of these can uh, play a role when it comes to identifying tense-based errors as well. And then a particular category of sentences, conditional sentences, are also, it's a very small, very tiny area, but it contributes a fair bit of questions to the exams. So over the years, this is something that I do consider important, or has over the years I have considered this important. Then subject verb agreement. Now, in order to become good at subject verb agreement, you need to know about nouns, pronouns, and conjunctions. So it's a combination of all these three things that makes you better at SVA, that makes you better at subject verb agreement. So these are the areas that I would typically consider high priority areas for you in the exam. And then there is this one last area from which we get a lot of questions, and this area also happens to be quite notorious, and that is prepositions. So notorious because unlike a lot of other topics where I can give you some kind of rules or guiding principles, we don't have any such rule, pattern, or guiding principle in prepositions. It's only when you start using English in your everyday life that you go ahead and master this. So if you want to focus on only a few areas, then these are the ones that you definitely want to master. And then once you're done with these, if you have, and once again, you do it only when you have paucity of time. If you're somebody who has a year with you, in that case, you obviously do not want to narrow your preparation down only to these areas. You would want to go ahead and cover the entire grammar. But if you have only a couple of months with you, 2-3 months with you, in which you're preparing for the CAT as well as the OMATs, and you're starting now, in that case, yeah, I think these are high priority areas for you. Let's go ahead and solve a few questions. So here is the first one. Let me start the time. Go ahead, evaluate this, and then tell me what the answer of this particular question should be. Try to solve it within this time limit. Okay, so it is not necessary that you've solved it by now. If you are still working, please pause the video, solve it, and then come back. But otherwise, I've given you a sentence divided into 4 parts, and you need to identify the part with a grammatical error. Okay, so let's read it together. The general manager and the controller have given his views on the agenda. Okay, now you notice what? We are talking about the general manager and the controller. Now, the question here is that it is one person or two. Because if it is one person, then we should not have used have. In that case, we'll use has. And in case it is, and then his views is right. But in case we are talking about two persons, then you'll use have here. But then instead of his, you need to use their here. So one person or two. Now, this is what I mean by pronoun antecedent agreement or subject verb agreement. It will go one of these two ways depending upon what your take on this is. So when I read this, I know that we are talking about two different persons, a person who's the general manager and a different person who's the controller. And I know these are two people because the article has been repeated. Had the article not been repeated, it would have been just one person. So because we are talking about two persons, this have is right, but this his needs to be replaced by there, and that is why part 3 is the one that we will mark as our answer. Here is the next one for you. Go ahead and check this out. Once again, your clock is ticking. I hope you have managed to figure something out because the clock is running and running rather rapidly at that. So once again, if you need more time, pause the video, answer it, and then join me. I'll go ahead and explain it. The error here is in part 4. Instead of then, we should use to. So normally when we use comparative degree of an adjective, it is followed by to. But if a comparative degree ends in or, it is never followed by then. It is always followed by to. Okay, so let's go ahead and have a look at our question number 3. Here it is for you. Go ahead and give me your answer to this particular question. Okay, so 10 seconds. Excellent. So let's see. Can India make it to a leadership position, or will it be retained the... Now you notice this part is suddenly in passive voice. Now passive voice is used when the subject and the doer, the entity which is performing the action is the doer, right? When they happen to be different, we use the passive voice. But here you notice this part is in active voice and we don't need passive voice here. So we need to change this. So will it retain the fast train going slow? And that is why our answer here must be option B. Here comes the next question. Why don't you go ahead and answer this? See, in case you need more time, you can always pause the video and do it. But this is one of those sentences where we happen to have an error of prepositions. So it is not reservation at jobs. You always have reservation in jobs. And that is why our answer here must be option C. Getting the drift? Let's go ahead and attempt one last question and then we will move on. So I hope you'd be able to focus on this and then think of something. All right. So see, government has reportedly made its displeasure known. You notice the use of present perfect tense. We use present perfect tense to talk about something that has happened in the immediate past or something that happened in the past, but we are not mentioning the time of its occurrence. So happened in the past, that's it. But then the negotiations are also over. So they must have also happened in the past. So instead of saying negotiations are completed and we needed a passive voice here, ideally it should be negotiations have been completed. So the wrong tense was being used here, and that is why our answer must be option C. So this gives you some idea of how we deal with grammar and what kind of questions, what level of questions to expect. Of course, subsequently in our sessions on OMATs, we will definitely take you through more of these. And now let's train our eyes on vocabulary. Now, when it comes to vocabulary, there are no specific focus areas that I can talk about as such, because I know that from the perspective of learning, the focus area for you is high frequency words. Words which are commonly used in the newspapers and the news channels, etc. and where are these words found, where can you learn it from, how do you go ahead and learn these things? Well, these are things that I typically cover in a session that I call vocabulary strategy session. Stay tuned and I will of course go ahead and take it for you on this session as well. Until then, make sure that you do take out 15 to 30 minutes from your calendar every day and work on vocabulary using the methods that you know, using the methods that you're already aware of. But that said, specifically, if I look at it from the perspective of the OMATs, we are going to get questions that are based on testing our understanding of synonyms and antonyms. Then they can actually give you idioms and phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs are verbs plus prepositions, a verb along with a preposition that leads to a different meaning. Now, instead of a preposition, you can also have an adverb here. There are times when phrasal verbs can have 3 words too, but I'm not getting into special cases. Usually, this is what it is. So they can test your understanding of phrasal verbs. They can, of course, test your understanding of spellings. Now, these question types are what I typically consider pure vocabulary questions, where if you know the meanings of all the words, idioms, or phrasal verbs involved, or of course you know the spelling, you'd be able to get it right. There is no catch here, but there are 3 question types: fill in the blanks, analogy, and odd word out, that take you beyond the scope of vocabulary. I mean, it's not just vocabulary. It is going to be vocabulary combined with reasoning in the case of analogy and odd word out, and vocabulary combined with comprehension, grammar, logic in the case of fill in the blanks. So that's the domain that you need to be ready for when it comes to your entrance exams. And here are a few questions to give you a sample of it. Let's dive into this. So here is your first one. So what do you think? What should the answer be? Okay, now the phrasal verb run over basically means to practice what you are going to say or deliver, okay, to rehearse. And we are looking for or the option which best expresses this meaning, and that is going to be repeat, right? Now, run over also has this other meaning. The car ran over the pedestrians. But then, just like words, a phrasal verb can also have multiple meanings at times. Or here is the next one. What's your take on this? So, this is what I call a contextual antonym question. Okay. So when I say it is not completely true that this particular play is completely bereft of humor or comedy, bereft essentially means lacking. So it was lacking in humor or comedy. It was deprived of humor and comedy. So deprived is a synonym, lacking is a synonym. Let's rule these out because we are looking for antonyms. If a person is bereaved, then it means that he has lost a loved one to death. Nothing to do with bereft. But replete means full of. If I say that his speech was full of sexual or replete of sexual innuendos, then it was full of sexual innuendos, and that's definitely an opposite, and therefore this is going to be our answer to this particular question. Here is the next one. Go ahead and tell me what the answer should be. Sorry. Okay. So obstreperous is an adjective that means noisy and difficult to control. So for example, if I say he becomes obstreperous after having a few drinks, तो पता है ना, थोड़ा शोर मचाना, चिल्लाना, गाना और थोड़ा डिफिकल्ट टू कंट्रोल करना हो जाते हैं लोग कई बार ऐसे सिचुएशन में. So unruly also refers to difficult to control, refusing to obey, right? An unruly class, remember? So that's pretty close. Lazy, awkward, no relation. Sullen is somebody who is bad tempered or ill tempered. But even this is not really connected to being noisy and difficult to control. So you can rule this out too. So the word which is closest to this meaning is the word unruly. So that should be the answer. Here is the next one where I'm just simply testing your understanding of the spellings. Why don't you go ahead and pick up the one which is incorrectly spelt out of the four. Okay, so amatory is spelled correctly. This word basically means relating to sexual desires. Body is spelling is correct. It basically means something which is indecent, obscene, vulgar. Persistence is what I typically want from you. The spelling is correct. If you're persistent, it means that you keep performing something, you keep at work for a long time, you don't give up easily, or you're not easy to get rid of. Now, this is the word which is spelt wrong because the correct word is apoplectic. So it was missing out on this C, and apoplectic means somebody who is extremely angry. And that is why our answer here must be option D. And let me leave you with this one last fill in the blank question and then see what you go ahead and mark as your answer here. Okay, so the disease has weakened her energy. You can reduce somebody's energy. You do not weaken it. You can sap someone's energy. So you can reduce it, lessen it, take it out, sap it. You don't weaken energy. Demeanor. Can you weaken somebody's demeanor? Demeanor is how you appear to others. So some people have a friendly demeanor. Somebody has a strict demeanor. No, that appearance. So you cannot weaken somebody's appearance. But you can weaken people's constitution, because one of the meanings of constitution is a person's immunity. That can be weakened. Abilities can also be weakened. So I think we can rule out options A and B on the basis of the first blank itself. So the disease had weakened her constitution or ability, and she could not recuperate in time for the meeting. Recuperate is recover. That's possible. She could not reassemble in time for the meeting. Has the disease, just like a machine, separated all her parts? No, that won't work. So reassemble cannot go. Let's rule it out. So our best answer is option C. So that's the kind of process that we go through when it comes to fill in the blank question. So I hope this gives you a taste of what kind of questions, or a taste of the kind of questions we expect. So just to recap, grammar and vocabulary are extremely important even for the CAT, and therefore I'd strongly urge that you take out some time to focus on these areas. For grammar, you can begin with a basic book of grammar, and there, if you have paucity of time, I've told you the areas which are high priority for you. And similarly for vocabulary, I've told you the kind of questions that you need to be prepared for, and the fact that you need to learn high frequency words. Where to learn it from is something that we can always take up in our vocab strategy session. Until then, you can definitely go ahead and put in the effort to acquire more and more words. So before I sign out, here is something that I'll leave you with. No excuses, just action. So even if you have not started when it comes to grammar and vocab, even if you haven't started yet, forget the past, start your work now. Okay, and that will allow you to deliver an amazing, sensational performance. So I'll leave you with that thought and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, have a great time and stay in touch.